Hi there. Welcome to Introduction to United States Government Part 3. So this is Part 3 in our series of several video lessons in our Introduction to U.S. Government. So without further ado, let's keep on keeping on. So just to review while we're waiting for this slide to show up, last video, we talked about the historical context that led up to the founding of the United States and led up to or the founding of the United States government specifically. So today, what I want to do is talk about the political philosophy of our founding fathers. And these are the set of beliefs that really underpinned the entire foundation of U.S. government. Some of those ideas are still present today. Some of them not so much. There's a lot of debate happening, of course, as I'm sure you're aware, over which of these ideals were positive and which maybe weren't so positive. But again, this is an introduction. As we go through the course, my students are going to have multiple opportunities to discuss and hash out what they find beneficial, what they find good, what they find not good, what needs to be changed, what should be thrown out altogether. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for discussion of this, but let's start setting the terms of the discussion, shall we? So here I depicted two founders, Thomas Jefferson on one side, Ben Franklin on the other, and these are two quotes by each of them. This one by Ben Franklin and this one by Thomas Jefferson, and they sort of summarize the beliefs of each of them and what particular principles they found important. Both of these principles were shared by the founders generally. So before I tell you what the political philosophy of the founders was, maybe we should answer the question, what is political philosophy, right? So this is a definition I got from the internet, a philosophical reflection on how best to arrange our collective life, our political institutions, and our social practices, such as our economic system and our pattern of family life. There's an alternate definition down here, a set of principles about the proper role of government and the relationship between the citizen and their government. So what we're really looking at is a series of ideas, of concepts, of principles, of things that are central, that involve the relationship between citizens and government. What is the citizen responsible for? What rights do they have? What is the government responsible for? How large or how small should their role be in our lives? So the political philosophy of our founders was, in fact, classical liberalism. Classical liberalism was their political philosophy. It most closely matches the modern political ideology of libertarianism. We'll talk more about that. It's not as much of a popular perspective today. Most people are either a liberal or a conservative, somewhere on that line, that spectrum. But we're going to talk about exactly what classical liberalism is, and then we can discuss its virtues and its detriments. Okay, so why classical liberalism? Well, the founders were children of the Enlightenment, as we spoke about in the previous video lesson. If you've forgotten what the Enlightenment was, you can go back and revisit that. They were mistrustful of government. I mean, they were really pretty upset with the British, right? They thought of themselves as British citizens, as having the rights of all British citizens, but they weren't getting those rights. The British were treating the Americans very differently than other areas of the empire, and certainly in mainland Great Britain, right? So they were mistreated by a strong central government for far away, and they were so upset about it. They were so mad. They were so pissed. They started a war about it, right? So they wanted to make sure that they did not create a strong enough government that would force them into doing things they didn't want to do. And classical liberalism is not about strong central government. It's about limited government, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But they believed that they deserved certain rights simply because they were human. Government did not have the right to infringe upon these rights. Rights do not come from governments. Natural rights we have because we exist, because we were born, okay? Pardon me. So what are the basic characteristics? So classical liberalism is effectively the belief in liberty, okay? It's the belief in the ability to determine your own destiny and self-govern, to make decisions for yourself that are in your best interest. Rights do not come from government. Certain rights are natural rights. Those are life, liberty, and property. We talked about that in the previous video lesson too. These are the key characteristics of classical liberalism. The belief in limited government, the belief in rule of law, avoidance of arbitrary or discretionary power on the part of government, sanctity of private property and freely made contracts, and personal responsibility. So these are the big five, and we're going to explore these in more detail in later video lessons and also in class as well, or in the virtual environment if you're not doing in-person instruction. But these are the key ideas that make classical liberalism what it is. So there are other types of liberalism. There's classical, and effectively classical liberalism, if you want to boil it down to a statement, government's job, the central government, specifically the national government, it's only to protect natural rights. Nothing more, nothing less. That's it. So you are protected from somebody coming in and taking your house, but nobody's giving you a house. There's no, so they don't believe in social welfare. There's no safety net. There's just, government is responsible for preventing another entity from depriving you of life, liberty, and your property. That's it. That's the only time government is to step in. That's effectively classical liberalism. 20th century liberalism, because when people think of liberals today, they think of Democrats, right? They think of strong, large central government that plays a pretty big role in our lives. 20th century liberalism is completely different from classical liberalism. Okay, they are two very different things. 20th century liberalism, which is what we would understand liberalism today to be, less emphasis on economic liberty. They believe the government should regulate the economy. And generally speaking, there's a more emphasis on civil liberties, although that definition is shifting a bit also. So those are the different types of liberalism you should be aware of. I will always be sure to differentiate. If I'm talking about classical liberalism, I will say classical. If I'm talking about 20th century, I will say 20th century, so that way nobody gets confused, but there are two different types. All right, so wrap up. This is a real brief lesson. So classical liberalism, that's the basic definition. You should memorize it. Rights don't come from government. Certain rights are natural rights. Government doesn't give it to us. We have it because we exist. And the key characteristics are limited government, rule of law, avoidance of arbitrary or discretionary power, sanctity of private property and freely made contracts, and personal responsibility. So I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in the next video.